The blizzard wasn't the only thing howling that night in the Blackwood territory. Tessa Hart thought she was saving a dying dog, a stray victim of the brutal winter. She dragged 200 pounds of bloody fur into her tiny, drafty cabin, risking her own starvation to share her last can of soup with him. She didn't know that the dog, watching her with intelligent amber eyes, was the most dangerous predator on the continent. She didn't know that by saving him, she had just invited the apocalypse into her living room. When the black armored SUVs rolled up her driveway 3 days later, Tessa realized her mistake. Mercy in this world isn't free. Sometimes it costs you your life. The thermometer nailed to the porch post read 10 degrees below zero, and the mercury was still dropping. Tessa Hart pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her frame, the wind biting through the wool as if it weren't even there. She was 22, an omega wolf without a pack, living on the jagged edge of the Blackwood territory. To the high society wolves in the capital, she was a rogue. To the humans in the nearby town of Oakhaven, she was just the quiet girl who bagged groceries at the fiercely discount market and lived in the old, rusted trailer at the end of a dirt road. Snow was falling in sheets, a white curtain that erased the world. Tessa adjusted her grip on the arm full of firewood. She needed to get inside. Her fingers were already numb, and her wolf spirit, weak and dormant for years, was curled into a shivering ball in the back of her mind. Crack. The sound wasn't a breaking branch. It was wet, heavy. Tessa froze. Instinct, ancient and terrified, spiked in her chest. She squinted into the whiteout. Near the tree line, where the forest met her small clearing, something dark disrupted the pristine snow. It looked like a boulder that hadn't been there that morning. She shouldn't investigate. The first rule of survival as a rogue omega was simple. Don't look, don't listen, don't engage. If it was a pack enforcer, she was dead. If it was a feral vampire, she was food. But then she heard it, a low, gurgling whine. It was a sound of pure agony. Tessa dropped the firewood. Curse her bleeding heart. She ran through the knee-deep snow, her boots crunching loudly. As she got closer, the metallic scent of copper hit her nose, overpowering the smell of pine and ice. Blood. So much blood. The boulder was a wolf, a massive, midnight black wolf, easily the size of a small pony. He was lying on his side, his breathing shallow and ragged. Steam rose from his flank, where 3 deep, parallel gashes had torn through the thick fur and into the muscle. The snow beneath him was stained a vivid, horrifying crimson. "Oh God," Tessa whispered, dropping to her knees. The cold instantly soaked through her jeans. The wolf's eyes snapped open. They were the color of molten gold, burning with a feverish intensity. He snarled, a low rumble that vibrated in Tessa's own chest, baring teeth that could snap her femur like a twig. "Easy," she said, holding up her shaking hands. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're dying." The wolf tried to rise, his claws scraping the frozen earth, but his legs collapsed. He let out a huff of frustration and pain, his head falling back into the snow. Tessa looked around. The blizzard was worsening. If she left him here, he would freeze to death within the hour, even with his wolf healing. But he was huge. "I can't carry you," she told him, her voice trembling. "You have to help me. I have a sled for the wood. If I get it, can you crawl onto it?" The gold eyes tracked her face. There was intelligence there. Frightening, human intelligence. He blinked once, slowly. Oh yes. It took Tessa 20 minutes of agonizing effort. She dragged the plastic utility sled over. She pushed, pulled, and leveraged the massive beast onto it. He groaned, his body heat radiating like a furnace against her frozen hands. When she finally hauled the sled up the ramp and into the main room of her trailer, her muscles were screaming. She kicked the door shut, sealing out the wind. The silence of the cabin was sudden and heavy. Tessa collapsed onto the linoleum floor, gasping for air. Beside her, the massive black wolf watched her. He didn't look like a stray. His fur, though matted with blood, was thick and lustrous. His muscle density was insane. "Who are you?" she whispered. The wolf didn't answer. He just closed his eyes, his breathing hitching as the warmth of the heater began to thaw his frozen wounds. Tessa scrambled up. She didn't have much. A first aid kit she'd stolen from a pharmacy dumpster 3 years ago, a bottle of cheap whiskey, and clean towels. "This is going to burn," she warned him, uncorking the whiskey. She poured the alcohol over the gashes on his flank. The wolf's body seized, every muscle locking up rigid as stone. He didn't whimper. He didn't howl. He just took it, silent and stoic. That was when Tessa knew. This wasn't just some random shifter. This was a warrior. And by the look of the claw marks on him, marks that looked like they came from something unnatural, he was running from a war she wanted no part of. For 2 days, the storm raged outside, burying the trailer halfway up the windows. Inside, a strange domesticity settled over the small space. The wolf, whom she had mentally named Shadow, occupied the entirety of her living room rug. Tessa was poor. Not romantic novel, poor, but real poor. She had 3 cans of beef stew, half a loaf of stale bread, and a jar of peanut butter. On the first morning, she heated a can of stew on her hot plate. The smell filled the small room. She poured it into a large mixing bowl and set it near the wolf's snout. "It's generic brand," she apologized, sitting cross-legged a few feet away. "But it's hot." The wolf looked at the bowl, then at her. He nudged it toward her with his nose. Tessa blinked. "I'm not hungry. You need to heal." He growled softly, a non-threatening rumble, and nudged it again. "You're stubborn," she said, a small smile touching her lips for the first time in months. She went to the cupboard, retrieved a spoon, and ate a single mouthful of the broth. "See? I ate. Now you." Satisfied, the wolf lapped up the stew in seconds. Over the next 48 hours, Tessa talked. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was because he couldn't talk back. She told him about her parents dying when she was 10. She told him about the alpha of her old pack, a cruel man named Silas, who had banished her because she refused to be his mistress. She told him how hard it was to keep a job when you had to take days off every month for the full moon fever. "I just want to be safe," she whispered on the second night, staring at the ceiling while the wind battered the metal roof. "I don't need a mate. I don't need riches. I just want to stop looking over my shoulder." The wolf shifted. She heard the click of his claws on the linoleum. She turned her head. He was standing over her couch, his massive head lowered. He pressed his wet nose against her forehead. A spark, electric and warm, shot through her. It wasn't the mate bond, she would have known instantly, but it was something close, a recognition, a pledge. He licked a tear she hadn't realized had fallen from her cheek. "You're a good listener, Shadow," she murmured, burying her hand in his thick neck fur. When she woke up the next morning, the storm had broken. Sunlight glared off the blinding white snow outside. The rug was empty. The back door was unlatched, swinging slightly in the breeze. Tessa felt a hollow pit open in her stomach. He was gone. No note. Obviously he was a wolf, but no sign he had ever been there, other than the blood stains she had scrubbed from the floor. She walked to the door and looked out. There were paw prints leading into the woods, but they changed halfway to the tree line. They shifted from wolf prints to the prints of bare human feet. And then... tire tracks? She looked closer. At the edge of the clearing, the snow was churned up, as if a vehicle had been waiting. He had a ride, she whispered to herself, feeling foolish. She had poured her heart out to a stranger. She had given him her food, and he had left without a backward glance. Figures, Tessa muttered, slamming the door shut. No good deed goes unpunished. She went back to her routine. She put on her uniform for the grocery store. She counted her tips. She tried to forget the golden eyes that had watched her with such intensity. She didn't know that 50 miles away, in the Obsidian Palace, a man was pacing his war room, growling at his generals, his mind entirely focused on a rusted trailer and the girl who smelled like vanilla and sorrow. 3 days later, Tessa was fired. Her manager, a graying human named Mr. Henderson, caught her taking expired sandwiches from the dumpster behind the store. Technically, it was against policy. Realistically, everyone did it. But Henderson was in a bad mood, and Tessa was an easy target. "Hand in your vest, Tessa," he sneered. "We don't employ thieves." She walked the 5 miles home in the slush, the cold seeping into her bones. She had $12 to her name. Rent was due in a week. As she turned onto a dirt road, she stopped. Usually, the only thing on her road was the occasional deer or a lost delivery truck. Today, the road was blocked. 3 massive black SUVs with tinted windows were parked in front of her trailer. They were sleek, armored, and expensive, the kind of cars that belonged to government officials or high-ranking alphas. Panic seized her. Silas. Her old alpha must have found her. Tessa spun around, ready to bolt into the woods, but a voice stopped her. "I wouldn't run if I were you, Miss Hart. The perimeter is secured." She turned back. A man was leaning against the hood of the lead SUV. He was tall, wearing a tailored black suit that cost more than her trailer. He had dark hair, sharp features, and an earpiece, a beta guard. "Who are you?" Tessa demanded, her voice shaking. "I haven't done anything wrong." "We aren't here for an arrest," the guard said, stepping aside. The rear door of the middle SUV opened. A man stepped out. The air in the clearing instantly grew heavy, charged with an overwhelming aura of power. It was alpha energy, but not like any she had felt before. This was crushing. It commanded submission. He was over 6'4", with broad shoulders that strained against his charcoal dress shirt. His hair was black as midnight, swept back from a face that was brutally handsome. High cheekbones, a strong jawline covered in stubble, and a scar running through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that made Tessa's knees buckle. Golden eyes, burning, intense, and familiar. "Shadow," she breathed. The man didn't smile. He walked toward her, his movements predatory and graceful. The snow crunched under his polished dress shoes. He stopped 2 feet in front of her, his scent, cedar, rain, and raw power enveloping her. "My name," he said, his voice a deep baritone that she recognized instantly, "is Kieran Valerius." Tessa's blood ran cold. She took a stumble backward. Kieran Valerius, the Alpha King, the ruler of all shifters in the Northern Hemisphere, the man known as the Iron Wolf. He was a myth, a monster who had united the packs through bloodshed and terror, and she had fed him generic beef soup. She had called him a good boy. She had cried on his neck. "Your Majesty," Tessa stammered, dipping her head, baring her neck in submission. I didn't know. If I had known, I would have—" "You would have what?" Kieran interrupted. He reached out, his large hand cupping her chin, forcing her to look up at him. His touch was burning hot. You would have left me to die? Or you would have acted like every other sycophant, trying to curry favor. I saved your life, she whispered, a spark of defiance igniting in her chest. You did, Kieran agreed. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. You saved me when my own brother tried to butcher me. You gave me your food when you were starving. You tended to me without asking for a dime. He leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear. And now, I'm here to return the favor. Tessa pulled back slightly. I don't need a favor. I just want to be left alone. Kieran laughed, a dark, humorless sound. Tessa, look around you. You live in a tin can. You have no pack. You have no protection. And now that my enemies know I was in this area, they will tear this woods apart looking for loose ends. You are a loose end. He stepped back and gestured to the open car door. Get in. Where are you taking me? To the Obsidian Palace, Kieran said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You are coming with me. Not as a prisoner, but you are not staying here. And if I refuse? Kieran's eyes flashed. You won't, because 5 miles away, a pack of rogues paid by my brother is currently tracking my scent. They will be here in less than 10 minutes. If you stay, you die. As if on cue, a distant howl echoed from the valley below. It was a hunting cry. Tessa looked at her trailer, her sad, safe little home. Then she looked at the king who was offering her a hand. Why me? She asked. Why come back, personally? Kieran looked at her, his expression unreadable, masking a storm of emotion. Because, he said softly, you are the only thing in this world that hasn't tried to kill me this week. Now get in the car, Tessa. She took his hand. The drive to the capital was a blur of silent tension. Tessa sat in the corner of the leather seat, trying to make herself as small as possible. Beside her, King Kieran Valerius was on a conference call, his voice a low, lethal rumble as he issued orders to his generals. He spoke of perimeter breaches and traitors within the inner circle, confirming Tessa's fear that she had walked out of a snowstorm and straight into a war zone. When the Obsidian Palace finally came into view, Tessa gasped. It wasn't a fairy tale castle. It was a fortress of black glass and steel cut into the side of a jagged mountain. It looked impenetrable, cold, and utterly terrifying. The convoy swept through the massive iron gates, past guards armed with assault rifles and silver-tipped spears. As the SUV came to a halt in the underground garage, Kieran finally hung up his phone. He turned to her, his golden eyes scanning her face. Listen to me closely, Tessa. Inside these walls, you are not a guest. You are a target. You really know how to make a girl feel welcome, Tessa muttered, clutching her frayed backpack. I am not trying to make you comfortable. I am trying to keep you alive, Kieran snapped, though his voice softened slightly at the end. My court is filled with wolves who smile while they sharpen their knives. You are an Omega. You have no pack. To them you are weak. You must not show fear. The door opened. Kieran stepped out and waited. When Tessa emerged, he didn't take her hand this time. He walked a step ahead, his posture rigid, radiating an aura of dominance that made the servants in the garage bow their heads, so low their noses almost touched the concrete. They took a private elevator to the penthouse levels. When the doors opened, they were met by a woman who looked like she had been carved out of ice. She was tall, blonde, and impeccably dressed in a white suit. Her scent was sharp, mint and expensive perfume. This was Lady Lydia, the daughter of the Northern Council's High Elder. Kieran, Lydia purred, stepping forward to kiss his cheek. Kieran turned his head slightly, so her lips only grazed his jaw. We were worried. The reports said you were MIA for 3 days. I was handling business, Kieran said dismissively. He gestured to Tessa, who was standing awkwardly in her muddy boots and oversized coat. Lydia, this is Tessa Hart. She is under my personal protection. She will be staying in the East Wing. Lydia's blue eyes snapped to Tessa. The look wasn't just cold, it was surgical. She dissected Tessa's poverty, her low rank, and her fear in a single second. A rogue? Lydia asked, a delicate sneer curling her lip. In the royal wing, Kieran, surely the servants' quarters would be more appropriate. She's tracking mud on the Italian marble. The East Wing, Kieran repeated, his voice dropping an octave. The alpha tone made the air vibrate. And get her a wardrobe. Burn those rags. I can wash my own clothes, Tessa spoke up, her voice trembling but audible. Lydia looked at her as if a piece of furniture had just spoken. It speaks, she deadpanned. Tessa saved my life, Kieran said, his eyes locking onto Lydia's. Treat her with the same respect you would show me. If I hear a whisper of disrespect, Lydia, I will forget that your father is an elder. Do we understand each other? Lydia paled. Of course, Your Majesty. Kieran turned to Tessa. For a moment, the mask slipped. He looked tired. Go with the maids. Get cleaned up. I have a war council to attend. I will come to you tonight. He strode away without looking back, leaving Tessa alone with the Ice Queen. Lydia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Well then, little stray, let's get you scrubbed. We can't have you smelling like wet dog and poverty when the king visits, can we? The next 3 hours were a humiliating ordeal. Tessa was scrubbed, waxed, and polished by a team of silent maids. They stripped her of her comfortable, albeit worn clothes, and dressed her in a silk gown that felt too light, too exposing. She was deposited in a suite larger than her entire trailer. It had a balcony overlooking the city, a bed the size of a boat, and a walk-in closet filled with clothes she hadn't chosen. But as the sun went down, the reality set in. The door was locked from the outside. She tried the handle. Click. Hey! She banged on the heavy wood. Let me out! Protocol, Miss Hart. A guard's voice came from the hallway. For your safety. She wasn't a guest. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. Tessa paced the room, her agitation growing. She went to the balcony. It was 20 stories up. No escape there. She felt a surge of anger. Kieran had saved her from the cold, yes, but he had just traded one trap for another. Around midnight, the lock clicked. Tessa spun around, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from the mantel as a weapon. The door opened, and Kieran entered. He had shed his suit jacket and unbuttoned his collar. He looked exhausted. He saw the candlestick in her hand and raised an eyebrow. Planning to bludgeon your host? He asked dryly. You locked me in, Tessa accused, not lowering the weapon. I secured the room, Kieran corrected, closing the door and leaning against it. There was an attempt on the perimeter an hour ago. My brother Thorne knows I'm back. He's testing our defenses. That's not my problem, Tessa snapped. I want to go home. You don't have a home, Tessa. Kieran's voice cracked, a sudden explosion of temper. He ran a hand through his hair. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to drag an innocent Omega into this bloodbath? If I send you back to that trailer, Thorne's men will peel the skin from your bones just to send me a message. The raw violence in his words silenced her. She lowered the candlestick. Kieran sighed, sliding down the door until he was sitting on the floor, his long legs stretched out. He looked less like a king and more like the wounded wolf she had nursed. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm tired, Tessa. I haven't slept in 4 days. Tessa hesitated. Her instincts told her to keep her guard up, but her heart, the same heart that made her drag a wolf through the snow, softened. She walked over and sat on the floor next to him, leaving a foot of distance between them. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. "Your side?" "It aches," he admitted. "Wolfsbane slows the healing." "Wolfsbane?" Tessa gasped. "That's poison. My brother plays dirty." Kieran turned his head to look at her. In the dim light, his golden eyes were soft. "Why did you help me, Tessa? You knew I was dangerous. You saw the claws." "I saw someone in pain," she said simply. "I know what it's like to be cold and ignored. I couldn't do it to someone else." Kieran stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand. His thumb traced the calluses on her palm, marks of hard work and struggle. "You are too good for this world," he murmured. "And definitely too good for a monster like me." "I'm not good," Tessa said, her breath hitching as he pulled her slightly closer. "I'm just surviving." "Then survive this," Kieran commanded, his voice intense. "Stay close to me. Trust no one else. Not Lydia, not the guards. Only me." He leaned in. The air between them crackled. Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. He smelled of rain and cedar, a scent that made her wolf whine with longing. He was going to kiss her. She knew it. She wanted it. Knock. 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 The sharp rap on the door shattered the moment. Kieran pulled back instantly, the mask of the Alpha slamming back into place. He stood up, pulling Tessa to her feet. "Enter," he barked. A guard entered, looking pale. "Your Majesty, urgent news from the southern border. The armory. It's been torched." Kieran's jaw tightened. He looked at Tessa one last time, his eyes full of regret. "Lock the door behind me," he ordered. And then he was gone. 2 weeks passed. Tessa became a ghost in the palace. She learned the layout of the East Wing. She learned which guards could be bribed for extra chocolate, the young one, Marcus, and which ones watched her with suspicion. She saw Kieran rarely. He was always surrounded by generals, looking grimmer with each passing day. The tension in the palace was suffocating. Everyone whispered about Prince Thorn, the Red Wolf, Kieran's exiled brother who was gathering an army of rogues and mercenaries to take the throne. Tessa tried to keep her head down, but trouble found her in the library. She was reading a book on history, trying to understand the politics of this world, when a shadow fell over her page. Educating yourself? How quaint. It was Lydia. She was wearing a crimson dress that looked like it was made of blood. She sat opposite Tessa, uninvited. "What do you want, Lydia?" Tessa asked, closing the book. "I want to help you," Lydia lied smoothly. She slid a small velvet pouch across the table. "Kieran is fond of you. It's charming, really. But he's a king. He needs a queen with connections, with power. You are a liability." Tessa stared at the pouch. "What is this?" "Money. Gold coins. Enough to buy a small house in the human territories, far away from here. Far away from Thorn's assassins." Lydia leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Kieran won't let you leave because of his pride. But if you slipped away, if you disappeared, he would be safer. He wouldn't have to worry about protecting a helpless Omega while fighting a war." Tessa's stomach churned. Lydia was right about one thing. Tessa was a distraction. "Why do you care?" Tessa asked. "Because I love him," Lydia said, and for a second she sounded sincere. "And because if he loses the throne to Thorn, we all die. You're weighing him down, Stray. Cut the anchor." Tessa didn't take the money. She stood up and walked away, her heart heavy. Was she the reason Kieran was struggling? That evening, a formal summons arrived. The annual Moon Festival banquet. Attendance was mandatory. Tessa stared at the invitation. A banquet, with the entire court. She would be paraded in front of the very people who despised her. A team of stylists arrived an hour later. This time, they didn't ask for her opinion. They dressed her in a gown of shimmering silver, the color of moonlight. It was backless, elegant, and clearly expensive. "His Majesty requested this color," the head stylist said, pinning Tessa's hair up. When Tessa descended the grand staircase into the ballroom, silence fell. The room was packed with hundreds of wolves in finery, holding crystal glasses. The smell of expensive perfumes and roasted meats was overwhelming. Kieran was at the bottom of the stairs. He was wearing a military dress uniform, black with gold epaulets. He looked devastating. When he saw her, his conversation stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened slightly. He walked to the foot of the stairs, ignoring the dignitaries around him, and offered his arm. "You look," he struggled for the word, "radiant." "I feel like a disco ball," Tessa whispered, taking his arm. Her hand was trembling. "Grip tight," Kieran murmured, leading her into the crowd. "Don't let them see you shake." The night was a blur of fake smiles and veiled insults. Tessa felt the quick eyes of the court on her, judging, assessing. She saw Lydia in the corner, holding a glass of wine, watching with a predatory gaze. Halfway through the dinner, a waiter spilled a tray of drinks near them. In the chaos, a folded napkin was pressed into Tessa's hand. She didn't look at it until she went to the powder room. Inside the stall, she unfolded the paper. It wasn't a napkin. It was a note scrawled in charcoal. "He lied to you. He didn't just stumble onto your land. He was looking for you. Ask him about the fire of 98. Ask him about your parents." Tessa stopped breathing. The fire of 98. Her parents hadn't just died. They had burned in a house fire that the authorities said was an accident. Tessa had been the only survivor, pulled from the ashes by a firefighter. She stared at the initial. T. Thorne. Her hands shook so hard she almost dropped the paper. Kieran knew? Kieran was involved? She flushed the note and washed her face with cold water. She had to get out of there. She had to breathe. She exited the bathroom and headed for the terrace doors, needing fresh air. "Leaving so soon?" Kieran appeared at her elbow. He looked concerned. "Tessa, your heart rate is spiking. I can hear it from across the room. What's wrong?" "Nothing," she lied, pulling away from him. I need air." "Tessa." He grabbed her wrist, not painfully, but firmly. "Talk to me." "Did you know my parents?" she blurted out. The color drained from Kieran's face. The silence that followed was deafening. It was an admission. "Tessa, it's complicated," he started, his voice strained. "Did you know them?" she demanded, tears stinging her eyes. "Yes," Kieran admitted. "Your father was my father's beta. They were exiled. I was a child, Tessa. I didn't know where they went until I smelled their scent on you in that cabin." "You knew who I was the whole time," she whispered, horror dawning on her. "You didn't bring me here to save me. You brought me here because... Why? Guilt?" "To protect you," Kieran hissed, stepping closer. "Thorne killed your parents to get to my father. He burned that house down. If he knows you're alive, he will finish the job. And you didn't tell me? I wanted to keep you safe from the past." Suddenly, the glass doors to the terrace shattered inward. Screams erupted in the ballroom. Black-clad figures rappelled down from the skylights. The lights cut out, plunging the room into chaos. "Get down!" Kieran roared, tackling Tessa to the floor as bullets chewed up the marble where they had just been standing. It wasn't a probe. It was an assassination. "Kieran!" Tessa screamed as a wolf, a massive, mangy rogue, landed on top of them, snapping at Kieran's throat. Kieran shifted mid-air, his clothes shredding as he transformed into the massive black wolf. He tore into the attacker, throwing the rogue across the room. But there were too many of them. "Tessa, run!" Kieran's voice echoed in her head, a telepathic link she didn't know they shared. She scrambled up, slipping on the glass. She looked for an exit, but the doors were blocked by men with silver swords. She saw Lydia across the room. The Ice Queen wasn't running. She was standing calm amidst the chaos, watching. Lydia caught Tessa's eye and smiled. She raised a hand and pointed straight at Tessa. Two rogues turned, their eyes locking on the Omega in the silver dress. Tessa backed up, hitting the wall. She was unarmed, she was weak, but as the first rogue lunged, something inside Tessa snapped. The fear boiled over into something hotter, something ancient. The dormant wolf in her mind woke up. It didn't whimper this time, it roared. Tessa didn't shift. She didn't know how, but a blast of pure kinetic energy exploded from her body. It hit the rogue like a freight train, blasting him backward into a pillar with a sickening crunch. The room froze. Even the fighting stopped for a microsecond. Kieran, his muzzle dripping with blood, turned to look at her. His golden wolf eyes were wide with shock. That wasn't Omega magic. That was something else, something forbidden. Before anyone could react, a dart hissed through the air. It struck Tessa in the neck. The world tilted. Her legs turned to jelly. As she fell, the last thing she saw was Kieran shifting back to human form, screaming her name, running toward her as the darkness swallowed her whole. Tessa woke to the smell of rust and damp stone. The luxury of the obsidian palace was a distant memory. The air here was stale, tasting of old fear. She tried to move, but her wrists were bound above her head with silver chains. The metal burned against her skin, a constant, searing itch that kept her wolf subdued and sick. She was hanging in the center of a concrete cell, her toes barely scraping the dirty floor. Finally, a smooth voice echoed from the shadows. The Sleeping Beauty awakes. A man stepped into the flickering light of a single bulb. It was like looking at a distorted reflection of Kieran. He had the same black hair, the same height. But where Kieran was rugged and imposing, this man was lean and sharp. His eyes weren't gold, they were a muddy, sickly yellow. Prince Thorn, the Red Wolf. "You look disappointing," Thorn mused, circling her suspended form. He poked her side with a cane he didn't seem to need. "Skinny? Weak? And yet, you possess the catalyst blood." "I don't know what you're talking about," Tessa croaked, her throat dry as sandpaper. "Let me go." Thorn laughed. "Let you go?" "My dear, you are the key to the kingdom. Did Kieran tell you why he killed your parents, or did he leave out the best part?" Tessa's heart hammered. "He said you killed them." "I lit the match." "Yes," Thorn admitted casually, as if discussing the weather. "But it was Kieran's father, the old king, who ordered the hit. Because your parents, humble as they seemed, carried a recessive gene. The gene of the white wolf, the spirit walkers. Wolves who can manipulate energy, not just muscle." He leaned in close, his breath smelling of peppermint and rot. "Kieran knew. He felt your power the moment he bled on your floor. That's why he took you in. Not out of gratitude, Tessa. He was hoarding a weapon." The door to the cell creaked open. The click of high heels on concrete shattered the tension. Lydia walked in. She was still wearing her blood-red gown from the banquet, but now she wore a heavy coat over it. She looked at Tessa with unmasked hatred. "Is she broken yet?" Lydia asked, checking her manicure. "Lydia," Tessa whispered. "How could you? He trusts you." "He ignored me," Lydia screamed, her composure cracking. "I have been by his side for 10 years. I managed his court, I balanced his books, I warmed his bed when he allowed it. And then he brings in a stray, a grocery store clerk, and suddenly I am invisible. No." She walked over and slapped Tessa across the face. The ring on her finger cut Tessa's cheek. "I will not be replaced by trash." "She's not trash, Lydia," Thorn corrected. "She's a battery, and once I drain her power to break the palace wards, you can have Kieran, whatever is left of him." "Kieran will come for me," Tessa said, blood dripping from her cut cheek. "I'm counting on it," Thorn smiled. "This is a trap, little wolf, and he is running straight into it." Hours bled into one another. Thorn left, but Lydia stayed, taunting Tessa with details of her betrayal. She explained how she had lowered the shields at the banquet, how she had tipped off the assassins. Suddenly, a deep, resonant boom shook the foundation of the building. Dust fell from the ceiling. Lydia froze. Another boom. Closer. Louder. It sounded like the earth itself was splitting open. A howl tore through the air, a sound of such raw, unadulterated rage that the silver chains on Tessa's wrists rattled. It wasn't just a wolf. It was an executioner. "He's here," Tessa whispered, a fierce joy sparking in her chest. The steel door of the dungeon didn't just open. It imploded. It flew off its hinges, crumpled like tin foil, and slammed into the opposite wall. Through the dust and debris, a monster emerged. Kieran was in his human form, but he was covered in blood. None of it his own. His shirt was gone. His chest was heaving. His golden eyes were glowing so bright they looked like headlights in the dark. Behind him lay a hallway of bodies. Thorn's guards. Dozens of them. Lydia screamed and fumbled for a silver dagger in her coat. "Stay back, Kieran. I'll kill her. I swear to the moon, I'll—" Kieran didn't even slow down. He moved with a speed that defied physics. Before Lydia could raise the blade, Kieran's hand was wrapped around her throat. He lifted her off the ground as if she weighed nothing. "Lydia," Kieran growled, his voice distorted by his wolf, "you made a mistake." "Kieran, please," Lydia choked, clawing at his hand. "I did it for us. Thorn promised—" "Thorn promised you a crown," Kieran snarled. "I promised you death if you touched her." He threw Lydia. She flew across the room and hit the far wall, sliding down unconscious. Kieran rushed to Tessa. His hands, so lethal a second ago, were trembling as he touched the chains. He didn't bother with a key. He gripped the thick steel links and pulled. His muscles bulged, veins popping in his neck, and with a guttural roar, he snapped the silver chains. Tessa fell into his arms. "I've got you." He buried his face in her neck, inhaling deeply. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry I wasn't faster." "Thorn!" Tessa gasped, clinging to his bare shoulders. He said you knew about my blood." Kieran pulled back to look at her. "I suspected, but I didn't care about the power, Tessa. I cared that you were the only person who saw me, not the king, I swear it." How touching. Slow clapping came from the doorway. Thorn stood there. But he wasn't alone. He was holding a remote detonator, and he was flanked by 4 massive rogues, each holding a rocket launcher aimed squarely at them. "Family reunion," Thorn grinned, and just in time for the fireworks. The click of the detonator button echoed like a gunshot in the silent dungeon. Tessa flinched, bracing for the fiery heat of an explosion, but the threat from Prince Thorn had been far more devious than a simple bomb. With a grinding metallic screech, the concrete floor beneath Kieran and Tessa disintegrated. The trapdoor swung open, plunging them into the abyss. Tessa screamed, the sound torn from her throat as they slid down a steep, slick chute carved through the bedrock of the mountain. It was pitch black, the air rushing past them, smelling of sulfur and ancient ice. Kieran's arm clamped around her waist like an iron band, pulling her against his chest to shield her from the jagged walls. They hit the bottom with a bone-jarring thud, landing in a deep drift of snow that had accumulated over centuries. Tessa gasped, spitting out ice crystals, and scrambled to her feet. The cold was instant and paralyzing, far worse than the drafty cabin where she had first met Kieran. They were standing in the arena. It was a natural amphitheater, carved by the wind into the highest peak of the Blackwood Mountains. Towering walls of sheer granite rose 50 feet on all sides, creating a bowl of death open only to the grey, churning sky. It was a place where ancient alphas had once duelled for supremacy, a place where bodies were left for the vultures. "Welcome to the killing floor," Thorn's voice boomed from above. Tessa looked up, squinting against the biting wind. Thorn stood on a fortified observation ledge built into the rock face, safe and unreachable. He looked down at them like a Roman emperor watching gladiator games, his face twisted in a manic grin. "You wanted the throne, brother?" Thorn shouted, his voice carried by the acoustics of the stone bowl. "The throne is built on blood. If you can survive my pets, you can have the crown. But we both know you won't leave this mountain alive." Kieran stepped in front of Tessa, his body radiating a heat that battled the freezing wind. "Thorn, fight me yourself! Coward!" "I don't fight corpses," Thorn spat. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. At the far end of the arena, 3 heavy iron grates groaned and lifted. From the shadows, a smell hit them before the creatures even emerged, a stench of rotting meat, chemical acid, and wet dog. 3 beasts prowled into the light. They were wolves, but twisted, monstrous versions of the species. They stood nearly 8 feet tall on their hind legs. Their fur was patchy and mange-ridden, revealing grey, leathery skin stretched tight over unnatural muscles. Their eyes didn't glow with the noble gold of an alpha or the blue of a beta. They burned with a chemically induced, blood-red madness. "Vargulfs," Kieran cursed, his voice low and grim. "Genetically modified. Vampiric venom mixed with shifter DNA. They feel no pain, Tessa. They don't stop until they are dismembered or burned to ash." "Can you kill them?" Tessa asked, her voice trembling as she backed up against the cold stone wall. "I can take 2, Kieran said, stripping off the tatters of his shirt, revealing the scars of a lifetime of war. "But 3 is a death sentence." He turned to her, gripping her shoulders. His golden eyes were desperate. "Listen to me. When I engage them, you run. There are crevices in the rock face, small fissures where they can't reach. Squeeze into one and do not come out until silence falls. Do you understand?" "I'm not leaving you," Tessa cried, gripping his forearms. "You have to. If you die, I have nothing left to fight for." Before she could argue, the first Vargulf let out a shriek that sounded more human than animal and lunged. Kieran roared, a sound of pure defiance, and shifted mid-leap. His bones cracked and reshaped in a split second, transforming him into the massive, midnight black alpha wolf. The collision was seismic. Kieran met the first monster in the air, his jaws clamping onto its shoulder. But the Vargulf didn't even flinch. It swiped a massive clawed hand, raking deep furrows down Kieran's flank. Blood, bright and hot, sprayed onto the pristine white snow. The second beast joined the fray, tackling Kieran from behind. They rolled in a violent ball of fur and teeth, snapping and tearing. Kieran was faster, his movements fluid and trained, but the monsters were tanks. He ripped the ear off one, but it just kept coming, driven by a mindless hunger. Tessa pressed her back against the rock, horror seizing her heart. Kieran was losing. He was fighting with the ferocity of a demon, but he was overwhelmed. The third Vargulf, seeing the alpha occupied, turned its red, burning eyes toward Tessa. It snarled, drool freezing on its chin, and took a step toward her. "No," Tessa whispered. She looked up at the ledge. Thorn was laughing. The sound of his laughter snapped something inside her. It broke through the fear. It broke through the conditioning of a lifetime of being told she was just a weak omega. My parents died for this, she thought, a sudden clarity washing over her. They died because of what is in my blood. The Vargulf charged. Tessa didn't run toward the crevices. She planted her boots in the snow. She didn't know spells. She didn't know incantations. She just knew that inside her chest there was a ball of white-hot fire that had been burning since the night of the banquet. She closed her eyes and pulled on that fire. "Get away from him!" She screamed the command, throwing her hands forward, palms open. The air in the arena rippled. A shockwave of pure, blinding white energy exploded from her body. It wasn't just wind, it was solid force. It hit the charging Vargulf like a freight train. The monster didn't just fly back, it unraveled. The energy tore through its twisted DNA, stripping flesh from bone, turning the biological nightmare into a cloud of grey dust and ash before it even hit the ground. The sound of the blast silenced the wind. Kieran, pinned beneath the other two monsters, looked up. The Vargulfs on top of him froze, sensing a predator far more dangerous than a wolf. Tessa stood in the snow, her hair floating around her head as if she were underwater, her eyes glowing with a terrifying, ethereal white light. She was a spirit walker, a living conduit of the moon goddess. "Leave him," Tessa commanded, her voice echoing with a harmonic resonance that vibrated in the marrow of everyone present. The remaining two Vargulfs abandoned Kieran and rushed her. Tessa didn't flinch. She swung her arm in a cutting motion. A crescent arc of white energy sliced through the air. It sheared the legs out from under the lead beast. As it fell, she thrust her other hand forward, blasting it into oblivion. The final monster skidded to a halt, whimpering, its chemical rage broken by primal fear. It turned to run, but Kieran was already there. With a final, vengeful lunge, the Alpha King tore out its throat, ending the abomination. Silence fell over the peak. Tessa fell to her knees, the light fading from her eyes. Her nose was bleeding profusely, and her limbs felt like lead. The magic had drained her life force dangerously low. Kieran shifted back to human form, ignoring his own grievous wounds, and scrambled toward her. "Tessa! Tessa, look at me!" I did it," she whispered, her vision blurring. "You did?" Kieran choked out, pulling her into his arms. "You're incredible, you're—" A mechanical whirring sound cut him off. Tessa forced her eyes open. Above them, on the other side of the ridge, a helicopter was rising. Thorn. He was escaping. "He's getting away!" Kieran snarled, trying to stand, but his leg gave out. "I can't reach him." "No," Tessa rasped. She grabbed Kieran's arm, using him to ground herself. "He doesn't get to leave. Not after this." She closed her eyes one last time. She couldn't see the helicopter, but she could feel it. She could feel the vibration of the engine, the heat of the fuel, the metal spinning in the air. She reached out with her mind, stretching her consciousness across the distance. She found the fuel line. Burn. She clenched her fist. A thunderous explosion rocked the mountain. A massive fireball erupted over the ridge, painting the grey sky orange and black. Debris rained down into the valley below. The red wolf was gone. Tessa collapsed completely, the last of her strength spent. The darkness rushed in to claim her. But this time she wasn't afraid. She felt the warmth of Kieran's skin, heard the frantic beat of his heart against her ear, and knew that for the first time in her life, she was safe. She had walked through the fire, and she hadn't just survived. She had ascended. And that is the story of Tessa and the Alpha King. What started as a simple act of kindness in a blizzard ended up toppling a tyranny and crowning a new queen. It just goes to show that you never know who you are helping The stray you show mercy to today might be the king who saves you tomorrow. I want to know what you think. Did Kieran deserve forgiveness for keeping the secret about Tessa's parents? Or was Thorn right that it was all manipulation? If you were Tessa, could you have forgiven him? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of romance, betrayal and magic, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. I have a darker, even more twisted werewolf story coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for listening, and stay wild.